Okay, welcome to tutorial 5. The first thing I'm going to do in this tutorial is I'm going to change the name. So top left hand corner, show properties, show building properties, and change the name to warehouse 5 to keep it in line with, I suppose, video 5 or tutorial 5, which we're working on right now. So I'm keeping my iterations going. Click update. I'm going to move now from dimension view to costing view because I'm going to produce a bill of quantities, or at least one element of a bill of quantities. And what I'm going to do here, making sure I'm in the workbooks tab, I'm going to add a workbook similar to the way I added a drawing or I added a dimension. Here I am going to name it warehouse. I might call it warehouse 2, in fact, because I already have a warehouse in there. You won't have it because that's something I had done previously, but you can use whatever name you want. Click insert. And you'll see that the Costex workbook looks very much like Excel. A little bit different, that it works on levels, so we can kind of double click into a level, carry out some quantity takeoff, build up a rate, come back out of that level, and it'll return to the level before that. The first thing I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to type in element 19 substructure. Bold it, and to get into the level behind that element or that row, I either click on 1 or I click on subtotal. I don't click in quantity unit, I can't click anywhere along that line similar to BuildSoft. I've got to double click on the subtotal or the row heading. Now I'm into, I suppose, that second level. I've given you this Excel spreadsheet. Let's copy it, right click, copy, and let's go back into our Costex workbook and paste that information in. So this was a manual measurement that we did in class with some manual quantities, and it'll be interesting to see, does our electronic quantities match, or are they similar to our manually measured quantities? So let's start with the first item, the topsoil for preservation. I do have a topsoil item. It's measured in meters squared, but I have a secondary quantity in there in terms of an area, which I can use in this regard. So I'm going to push down on my left click button, and I'm going to keep holding it. I'm going to drag that quantity over to its appropriate cell, which is opposite the item, meter squared, average 300 millimeter thick, and I'm going to release. Because my quantity type there is volume, which matches the display quantity there, I need to change it. So I'm going to drop down and click area. So I'm looking for the secondary quantity, and I'm going to click update. So a little bit different. It was 245. In this case, it's 239. Reduce levels. It's going to be slightly different. I'm going to delete that quantity. I'm going to actually double click into the cell to get to, I suppose, the quantity level where I can build up some quantities. Double click in, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drag that topsoil over. I'm going to drop it either in count or length. I can actually drop it in width as well. I'm going to take the area, same again, and click update. So now I see topsoil. That's an area instead of, well, you can see it there, X get area. Not quite a length, even though it was dropped in the length column. And I'm going to give it a height of, it's actually 0.11. So we did a cut and fill exercise, and the actual cut, or the reduced level excavation, is 110 millimeters. So when I come back out of that, I actually got a quantity there of 27 meters cubed. I'm going to, next item, foundation trenches. I'm going to delete that, and I have taken off my excavation to my foundation trenches, both for pads and strip footings. Again, I'm going to double click into my quantity cell, and I'm going to select both those items. So select and then hold down control key and click the other one, and then I can drag and drop both those items into my length. Keep it as a volume, that's essentially what I'm looking for. Click OK. So both my pads and my strip footings in there in terms of excavation. I could have drag and dropped them item by item, which would have worked just fine. Come back out of that, and I've got 48 meters squared. These next 4 or 5 items are provisional quantities, so I'm just going to leave them as is. The working space I haven't measured just yet, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to move on to disposal. So the first 2 items in my disposal category are surface water disposal and groundwater disposal. They're just items, so it'll be just a price put against those if the tender prices this bill of quantities. And then my next item is disposal of the topsoil, which I've already excavated up here. So topsoil is excavated a meter squared, interesting enough, and it's disposed of in meters cubed. So just going back to that item, and I actually have that there. Topsoil, I measured it. I put a default height of 0.3 in there when I measured that in area, and I'm just going to drag and drop that over and release it. I don't need to manipulate it. Take it as the volume, click update. Now slightly different from 72 to 73 or 73 to 72. Into my excavated material, I'm just going to delete this. Now I've excavated both the reduced levels and the foundations. So let me take that first item. I can copy it, Control C, and I'm going to paste it in there. Now, as well as disposing of my reduced level excavation, I also need to dispose of my pads and strip footings. So I'll select it, copy, come back out again, go back down, double click in and paste it just below my reduced level. So once I come back out of that, I'm disposing of 75 meters cubed of excavated material. Now I will use some of that as filling, so I'm not going to dispose of the full 75 meters cubed, so I will have to come back to it. So starting with filling to the outside of those foundations, which I've measured, I'm going to go to essentially where I measured that, and here we are, filling outside of excavations, and I'm going to drag and drop it over, release, click update, 4 meters cubed. Now interesting enough, if I hover over that, it's 4.2. If I wanted to round up, I right click, edit function, and I'm going to round the decimal places to 0. I click update there, and it'll probably round up, yeah, rounds up to 5. Otherwise, it'll round to 2 decimal places and then round down, round to the nearest whole number. This 2 meter cubed is bulk filling, so it was I suppose the fill from that cut and fill exercise we did in class. So I'm just going to leave that as is. We didn't actually do a calculation here. Just take it from me that it is 2 meters cubed. And what I need to do now is go back into my 75, and I need to deduct those items out. So I'll drag and drop that filling to outside of excavations again. Click update. In fact, I drag and dropped it into the wrong item. Do it into the length. Click update, and to change it to a negative, put -1 into the factor, and then I'll also deduct that bulk filling. And that was 2 meters cubed, and also was a -1 in terms of changing it to a negative. So come back out, because I'm using 7 meters cubed in terms of filling of that excavated material. I'm not disposing of it, I'm using it on site. I deducted it from my 75 meters cubed, so it's now 68. So moving on to the next few items. Then I've got the filling the inside face of those excavations, and I also measured it there. I'm going to drag and drop it over and click update. Now because it was, if I hover over it, because it was 6.51, it's going to round up to 7, but if it was just below that, it would actually round down. Filling to make up levels. What I need to do with this is find where I measure my ground floor area. So there it is there, 193 meters squared. That is my floor area, my ground floor area. I'm going to double click into it, and I'm going to drag and drop it into my length. I'm going to look for its area. Well, in fact, it's going to be defaulted to area because it's displayed here as area, and I'm going to click update. The height of my hardcore, I believe, is 225 millimeters, so 0.225. So area times height gives me volume, so 44 meters cubed. Again, I can drag and drop that 193 straight in there. It's my ground floor area, which will also be used for sand blinding. Blinding for, or lean mix blinding for the underside of foundations, just looking at where that is. If I click to my foundations drawing, I can see there in my detail, I've got a lean mix 50 mil sand blinding just below the strip and pad foundations. So what I need to do in that regard is I'm just going to delete the quantity, and I'm going to drag and drop over either my concrete pads or my pads excavation. So double click in, take the pads and strip excavation, take them both together or one by one is fine. This time I'm going to take them as an area rather than the volume. So that gives me the area of my excavations, and I'll multiply them by the height of my lean mix concrete, which is 50 mil by 0.05 a meter. So when I come back out of that, I've got 4 meters cubed. My bulk filling I'll leave as a provisional, was 10 meters cubed. And now the filling of my cavity walls. So again, if I want to see where that is, click my dimension view. I've got, in fact, hopefully I'm on the right. Yeah, I'm on the right drawing. Click the little measure distance. I've got about 500 millimeters or 0.5 a meter of fill there. So in the cavity. So I'm just going to delete that, double click into it, and I have my cavity wall center line. Take that in, drag and drop it, select it as the length, which is fine, which is what it's defaulted as. It's 100 millimeters across, or 0.1, and as I said, it was 0.5 meters high. So when I come back out of that, I've got 3 meters cubed. Now, if I go back to my dimension view, I do have filling in these corner areas as well. Okay, so I got 4 corner areas there. In fact, I could do a little manual measurement on it. I probably need to be, that's the wrong scale, I probably need to do that particular one. So click the little measure distance, 0.34 or 0.35, and say 0.55. So going back to my costing view, double click back in, I'll just add those corners because I will have a lean mix fill in them. 4 times 0.35 times 0.55, and let's take the same height. Now this shouldn't make much of a difference. In fact, it's added very little. It looks like it's 0, but in fact, if I just increase the decimal places there, it's 0.39 of a meter cubed, and it's increased it from 3 to 4 meters cubed. So moving on to the next item, it's my concrete and my foundations, which I actually have measured. Delete it because I'm using 2 measurements here. If I was using 1, I could drag and drop it directly into the cell, but because I'm using 2, I'm going to double click in, and there's my 2 concrete measurements. Drag and drop them over, drop them into the length cell or height cell, doesn't really matter. Select them as volume, click OK, come back out. So that was a fairly simple one. The beds themselves, I measured my ground floor area. There it is there. Again, I'm going to double click in, take the ground floor area, drop it into the length, take it as an area, click update, and the height of my concrete is 0.15 or 150 millimeters. That's also 29 meters cubed. Where am I getting these dimensions? If I click my dimension view, scroll across to my detail here, I can see 150 millimeter concrete floor, 50 millimeter extruded polystyrene insulation on a DPM, on 50 millimeter sand blinding, on 225 hardcore. So that's essentially the build up of my floor, and I have a floor area, so I'm just assigning that floor area and multiplying it by the respective height of each item in that floor. I'm not going to measure the design joints, just get past those. The power floating, again, that'll be fairly straightforward. Drag and drop the floor area, that's the surface finish. With the reinforcement, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure one of these. Again, if you can remember from class, we measured the tonnage of steel in our concrete in terms of reinforcement or concrete foundations, and we divide it by those 3 categories because we don't have a reinforcement schedule. We don't know exactly what reinforcement it is in there, so we're going by a kind of a rule of thumb. Now, to calculate this, I'm going to double click into my quantity, and I'm going to take my volume of concrete pads. So again, select those 2 items, drag and drop them into length, take them as a volume. So I've got about 29 meters cubed there in total between those 2 items of concrete, and the rule of thumb I'm using is 150 kg of steel per 1 meter cubed. So I'm going to multiply, it doesn't necessarily have to be a width, it's just one thing multiplied by another, and that gives me 4,275 kg. So to change that to tons, I divide it by 1,000 or multiply it by a factor of 0.001, which is the same. 0.001. Okay, to see exactly what that is, I can just increase the decimal places there. Come back out, and I've got 5. In fact, I might change the number of decimal places here by right clicking, edit function, show, instead of 0, show this rather as a whole number, show it to 2 decimal places, and then go and increase. So I got 4.28 tons of steel, reinforcement steel, in the concrete footings, both my pads and strip footings. As I said, I'm going to divide it by 1/3 or multiply it by 33 1/3 percent to break it out into those 3 categories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click back in, and in the height column or in the count column, it doesn't really matter, multiply by 0.333. 0.333, well, it's 0.333. Come back out, and I got 1.43. So just copy and paste those items into the 3 categories. So those 3 should add up to what I previously had in one category. Fabric reinforcement to my concrete bed. That's essentially, again, going to be my ground floor area. Fairly straightforward. Update. Moving on down to the sides of my foundations. Again, I'm just going to delete the formwork to the sides of my foundations. Again, I'm just going to delete the cell. I'm going to double click into it, and I'm going to take my strip and pad foundations. I can take either the excavation or the concrete, and I'm going to drag and drop it into length, and actually take it as a length. So come back out again, and I've got about 192 meters of lengths of foundations, and that will measure either side. Now that could be a bit of an over measurement, because if I click on my dimensions, and there's my 2 dimensions highlighted, control click, I can see that I will have overlaps here. So I'm not going to have formwork across there, I'm not going to have formwork across there, and yet I've actually measured that twice because I'll have it on either side. So I need to deduct that out. So on every pad, I've got it in 2 places, times 2 because either side of it, and then I got it in 4 places, 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of my inner strip foundation. So I'm just going to go back to my costing view, double click in again, and deduct those overlaps. So I have 8 pads times 2 sides of the pad, so 16, and the width of those foundations is 0.9, and I'm going to, again, because it's on both sides, both on the strip side and the pad side, I'm going to multiply it by -2 to change it to a negative. Again, deduct the overlaps. For the inner strip foundations, I got those in 4 places. Those strip foundations are 0.815, and again, -2. So that's made a bit of a difference. So if I come back out, I've got 157 meters there. So it wasn't quite the 193 because of those overlaps, and I had to duck that out manually. Moving on to my walls. This should be straightforward. There's my rising walls. The first item is my 100-meter brickwork wall. So I'm just going to drag and drop that over because it was measured as a vertical area, or at least displayed as a vertical area. I can click update. Moving on down, next item, the 100-meter blockwork. Drag and drop it. Release. The next item, the 22 meter squared, drag and drop it. Update. So they were quite simple because they were displayed exactly in a way I was looking for. I didn't have to manually do a measurement and double click in. The bonding to other work, I'm just going to leave for the moment. That can be measured as well. The forming cavities, I'm just going to delete that, double click in, use my center line again of my cavity wall, drop it in there as a length. And what height am I going to use? I'm just going to go back to my dimension view, click on my foundations, look at this detail. I measured the cavity infill, but I've got this little bit of insulation and forming cavity wall here just above the insill up to the DPC, and it's about, let's say, 200 or 175 millimeters high. So back to my costing view and multiply it by 0.175. So it's just that little area above the cavity concrete infill that I'm going to measure as forming cavities, and I got about 11 meters squared. So that is significantly different than what was there, but I think what was there was a mistake. Damp proof courses, again, in terms of meter, there's that. Going back to my dimension view, I've got a DPC on each leaf, and of course I'll have it on my internal walls as well. I'm going to double click in, and I'm going to come down, I'm going to take my 100 millimeter block work and my 2 and 5. Now I'm not going to take the 100 millimeter brickwork because that would be double measuring my outer leaf. I just have to take one of them, and I'm going to drag and drop those both over, and I'm going to select them as a length. Click OK. Come back out. We got about 139 meters damp proof coursing. Moving on down to the radon barrier. It's fairly straightforward. I have that calculation. There it is there. 193 meters or meters squared. In terms of the vertical calculations, or the vertical side of that damp proof membrane or radon barrier, again looking at the dimension view, I have it up the inside face of that internal wall, and then of that internal leaf, sorry, on the external wall, and then on the internal wall, which I don't have a detail of, I'll have it on both sides of that. Now if I was to click my ground floor area again, show it where I measured it, what I have here is I got the area, but I also will have a length of each one of those dimensions, and this is essentially what I'm looking for, because it basically forms a perimeter on the outer edge of that area, and also will measure the length of those negative dimensions that I measured either side of the wall. I'll have a slight over measurement here and kind of here and here, but from the scheme of things I actually don't think it'll make much of a difference. So back to my costing view, delete the 22 meters squared, double click in and take the ground floor area, but take it as its length. Click update, look for the height. Actually I didn't check the height. The height will be about 200 or just over 200. Now usually it's maybe the depth of one block, so I might take the depth of the block, click costing view and type in 0.225. So you could use 200 or 0.225 there, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to err on the high side. Come back out and I actually got 22. Now these two items and these two items are the same, because this is essentially the floor area, that's the floor area. So I can copy and paste, and I can do the same, copy and paste for that vertical insulation. So again, dimension view, I see my vertical insulation along the inside face of that deep vertical DPC. Moving on down here, I'm just going to leave that 8 holding down assemblies. I'll have a holding down assembly everywhere my column connects with my concrete pad, and I have 8 pads and 8 columns, and I'll leave the provisional sum as is. The last item I'm going to measure is my working space. So I left that, it's quite near the start here. If I just scroll back up, so this 28 meters squared, I'm just going to add a new dimension group, go back to my dimension view, add a new dimension group, call it working space. I'm going to measure it as a length. I actually might drop it down and put it in substructure excavation. Give it a default height. It's actually 1.16. Default display it as a wall area, and maybe measure it as, I don't know, gold. Click insert and click my foundation plan. Measure it as point. Now where I have working space is anywhere in terms of the depth of excavations over 1 meter. And that is essentially just on the outer edge of those pads. Both the strip footings, or either side of the strip footings in terms of excavation, the sides of the excavations aren't over 1 meter, and the inside of that pad isn't. So let's just start. I'm going to do a continuous line by control, click. Then release the control button. So that's a continuous line. Move on to the next pad, hold down control, click. Fast forward. Last one. And there we have it. All the outer perimeter of my pad excavations measured in terms of a length, with a default height in there of 1.16, and there we have an area measurement of 28 meters squared. So back to my costing view, and just utilize that 28 meters squared in my working space. It's defaulted as a wall area, which is fine. Click update. So that is tutorial 5. Thank you very much.